Okay, so I've watched the video a couple times now, and I think I've got a couple issues. Overall, I think the video did a very good job. It shows how you can work through just ax squared plus bx plus c to find the quadratic formula, which honestly I don't think I've seen before, or at least I haven't seen in a long time. So it was actually pretty cool. Couple issues though. One is this dude's moving fast. Really fast. He is moving from one step to the next, and there is barely any room to breathe, or you have to pause it at a bunch of times if you stop paying attention, or if you just don't get something instantly. You are almost definitely going to have to pause the video and go back to understand what he did, because he is blowing through this thing. Secondly, and I think this kind of works with that, at the beginning of the video, if you look on YouTube's watch chart, you can see where people stop the video at or rewind to, and you can see a lot of people stop early on at the section where he talks about breaking up b over a into 2 times b over 2a. And I think that's partially because he's moving really fast. And the second part is I don't really understand why he did that. I understand why he found the half. He used the half and he squared the half so he could get a perfect square. That makes sense. But he broke it into just one. He originally just multiplied 2 over 2 by b over a. But he didn't need 2b over 2a, and he didn't use that. He had the number right there, and then he had a purple line under it, and then he had 2 times b over 2a. He never did anything with 2 times b over 2a. He did something with b over 2a. He squared it and then added and subtracted that from the equation, but he never had anything with 2b over 2a. So I feel like that was just kind of pointless and meaningless, and it definitely threw me off for a second, and it, based off how the video shows people stopping and rewinding at that point, it probably threw a few other people off. Would have been much easier if he just said, okay, let's take half this equation. Let's multiply the denominator by 2 to get the half, square that, can't just add it and without adding it to the other side, so let's subtract that so it's still balanced, and then here we go. And then moving on from that, he doesn't really explain why m plus n whole thing squared, so square root of m plus n equals m squared plus 2mn plus n2, n squared. This is a little bit of a nitpick, but he just says, we know, not necessarily everybody does, not necessarily every student's gonna remember that. So even just quickly writing down a FOIL method to show hey, this is how you multiply it out, this is how, and you're gonna get 2mn, so you'll get 2mn, and both the n and m are going to multiply themselves once, so you'll get m squared plus 2mn plus n2. So I think those are a couple issues. And then something else that I think was, and then building off of that, I think he does need to make the connection between x plus b over 2a squared and m plus n square root of 2. The reason he found b over 2a was because he squared it to make the front half of it a perfect square, so he could use the m plus n, what we know about that, to make it into a x plus b2a. Wow, I'm really just saying a lot of nonsense. Past that. But he doesn't really make it clear that, hey, since we know this, we know we can do this with this. Since we know we have a perfect square formula here, we know that this is also just equal to x plus b over 2a all squared. We know that because of this. He doesn't really make that connection clear for long enough or emphasize it enough. He really just blows past it and goes through it. So that's another point where if you look at the view graph on YouTube, you can see people went back to it. It's not as much as that first part. Speaking of moving fast, I feel like I'm currently going really fast. But moving on. So later on in the video, he talks about he square roots the entire right side. He moves everything over and then squares the entire thing. And then he mentions really fast that 4a to the second when squared all equals 2a, which, yeah, I mean, it does. When you have two things multiplied, you can find the square root of both of them. And I mean, both of those can be square rooted pretty easily, but not every student's going to know that because that was in the denominator. When you go up to the numerator, he wasn't able to square those because it was subtraction. It was b squared minus 4ac. You can't, even though you can find the square root of b squared and you can find the square root of 4, you can't find the square root of the whole thing because you can't find the square root of a. Because you can't just square root that when there's that subtraction right there. That's just not going to work. That's not how that works. But that does work for multiplication. So when you have 4a to the second, you can square root that. You can find that square. But he doesn't really emphasize that, and he doesn't really explain that right away. He doesn't explain that you can separate those two and put them both into, okay, here is square root of 4. That's 2. Here's square root of 2a. I mean, a to the second, that's just a. He doesn't explain that that can work, but when you're doing it with but when you're square rooting a whole thing that's subtracting itself, that doesn't really work like that. Because you're subtracting that whole thing, b squared minus 4ac. You're finding the square root of that whole thing. You can't just break that into different pieces and say, okay, this is now 2 square root of ac, or this is now b minus square root of 2ac. Yeah, 2 square root of ac. You can't just do that. And he doesn't emphasize that well enough. Another thing is he doesn't really explain why it is plus or minus the square root. Which, again, this might be a nitpick, but he doesn't really go into detail or emphasize that when you find the square root of something, there's two answers. There is always two answers. There is the positive and the negative, because when you multiply negative by a negative, it's positive. So when you find the square root of 4, your answer isn't just 2, it is 2 and negative 2. Because 2 times 2 is 4, and negative 2 times negative 2 is also 4. And, 1 second. Sorry. Okay, yeah, and then going back a little earlier in the video, he talks about multiplying c over a by 4a over 4a, because he wants to add b squared over 4a squared. He wants to add that to c over a. But to do that, he needs the same denominator on both. He needs the denominator, both of them, to be 4a squared. So to do that, he's multiplying it by 4a over 4a, which makes sense. But the problem is he doesn't really tell you why. He doesn't explain that you can multiply c over a by 4a over 4a, because that's essentially multiplying it by 1. Because a number divided by itself is just 1. So you can just multiply c over a by 4a over 4a and get that same denominator, which is 4a squared, because you're just multiplying it by 1. But he doesn't really emphasize that, and he doesn't stay on that too long, which I feel a little hypocritical about, because I am also talking really fast. So I kind of understand where he's coming from. But overall, I do think this was a good video. I was going to mention how he didn't exactly explain what this was, but then at the end he did. I think this was a pretty cool video. I don't think I've seen this before. If not, it's been a long time, and I just don't remember it. So yeah, pretty cool.